Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Total NASL TV's second episode of Off the Pitch, NASL Off the Pitch. My name's Kartik, Krishnaiyer. I'm your host. I'm joined by the esteemed Neil Morris today, one of the top writers covering the North American Soccer League, and maybe the only writer who's continuously covered, you and Steve Sandor, the only two writers that have continuously covered the league since the inception in 2010, the USSF Division II, with the NASL Conference and our NASL affiliated teams on into today. So how are you tonight, Neil?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me, Kartik. I think Brian Korstad counts as continuous coverage of some sort. I'm not willing to say that he
stepped away for a little bit, but yes, I think we brought BQ has done so much that he deserves whatever the 6 months or so that he didn't cover the league. He deserves he deserves credit for those 6 months. So, and of course, Brian.
I think my continuous coverage counts the same as when I say that the Railhawks are the longest continuously operating brand in the current NASL, which is true, by the way.
That is true. Miami FC would technically be the oldest brand, having operated from 2006 to 2010. And then of course that's not Miami FC anymore. But yes, the Railhawks are now entering their 10th season, historic 10th season as the Carolina Railhawks. Still, the high water mark for the Railhawks might have been that U.S. Open Cup run in the first year. One of the high water marks, at least.
Yeah.
For the Railhawks. So, Neil, great to have you with us. And Brian Korstad, by the way, I guess will be joining myself as an MLS club beat writer next season. I just got an Orlando City beat with an independent publication in the Orlando area, so I am stuck covering them again this season. Not necessarily thrilled about it, but I'm going to be covering Orlando City again this year. So a little bit of MLS have to cover in addition to the NASL. But of course, we love the NASL first and foremost. Neil, it's been a busy offseason. It's been an interesting offseason. One of the observations you've made to me privately is about the number of NASL teams that are traveling now, that are going abroad. Tampa Bay going to England, Fort Lauderdale going to China, and et cetera, et cetera. What are your thoughts on that, and how do you quite explain that?
I don't know, and I think that's why it's interesting to have someone like you to talk about it. Edmonton's going to Scotland, and you mentioned that Minnesota is going to Mexico in a few weeks. It's too conspicuous to be ignored, I guess, is what my main point is. In years past, you've seen Tampa Bay went to Portugal last year, and the Cosmos bounced over to several places. But this year, you've seen at least 4 or 5 NASL clubs who presumably spent the money to travel overseas, which is not an inconsiderable expense. And I guess I'm just asking the open question: what's that about? I mean, sure, we could say it feeds into this global soccer market that Bill Peterson always talks about, but to what end? What is going on? Is this the evangelizing of the NASL in other markets, the continuation of attempting to draw other international players to the league, international investors? Is it just one piece of the pie? I've gone beyond believing that these are just individual clubs acting on their own. I think it's too conspicuous at this point that you have, close to 40% of the league that are going out of the country during the preseason. When you look at USL, I don't know that any team left the country for their preseason. But even more conspicuously, the Major League Soccer doesn't leave the country for their preseason, with the exception of those that are playing CONCACAF Champions League, of course. So the fact that the NASL is making these inroads, we can sort of debate what the propriety or the value may be, but the fact that they're doing it and leveraging, what contacts and connections they have to make it happen is too conspicuous. And I, normally I would chalk these things up to, well, this is attempting to lure those foreign investors that I know that are being courted, and maybe it's one piece of the pie of this international reach that the league is trying to make. But this is an awful lot of expense for these teams to incur for that. And I guess I still have the open question of to what end. It's impressive. It's certainly it's sort of an element of professionalism. I know that you've talked a great deal about that in various terms. But it's just too conspicuous at this point, and too interesting, and it is.
Yeah, at what point, I wonder, does it become a hindrance or something that the league pulls away from? Because MLS has sent teams abroad before. I mean, I remember very clearly DC United going to Spurs and playing a friendly at White Hart Lane and beating them in 2000 or 2001. And then obviously there was a game where the MLS All-Stars went and played Real Madrid and got waxed. But MLS has done this before. They just haven't been doing it recently. So maybe it's part of a building step, and MLS feels like they're at a certain point, at a certain level, although I think there's more mockery of MLS than anything abroad, quite frankly. But I mean, they feel like they're at a certain level that maybe they don't have to do this. But it is very interesting. What do you make of the reaction to the NASL, though, abroad from fans over there? Have you seen a lot of positive press come out of it for the league?
Well, we've all seen the increased coverage from Britain and other places,
Wow. Yeah.
which was a concerted effort, but by the league. You know, beyond that, no. I mean, I don't think we've seen anything that's penetrated our market. But
I
it's
should
baby
point
steps.
out the stuff that's in the British press is online, and they're not in the printed newspapers. So I've spent a lot of time over there, and I get those papers. And when the Telegraph runs articles on the NASL, it's on Telegraph Online. When the Guardian runs an article on NASL, it's not actually in the print edition. Just to point that out.
No, that's true, but it's still contacts overseas that are being sought by the league overseas. And, you know, obviously Rayo Vallecano, whatever you want to think about it, a huge international influx. The ownership of a great many teams have international or foreign elements now. You know, but beyond that, have I seen any grand penetration of the broad media for the NASL? No, but it's baby steps. I mean, that's what it is. But I guess my curiosity is still what the league is up to. I mean, not that it's anything nefarious, but it's clear that the league, for whatever reason, has identified that there's fertile ground outside the United States for potential investors or folks who may be interested in being involved in a league where there's more upward mobility or independence of control than MLS. I mean, whether they're right or wrong remains to be seen.
But it's
but
something
they've clearly identified.
Oh, go ahead, Neil.
No, but they've clearly identified that, and you know, it's one of these things that happen behind the scenes that you see sort of progressing, that you wonder, well, where is this heading?
Yeah. I think one of the things, though, that maybe you and I have talked about offline a lot, and that is not a real popular opinion among NASL fans, because we have these NASL diehards who have this very ideological view of MLS, and I subscribe to a lot of those points, but I think we've gotten to a point where every single American investor in the sport, everybody who's American who invest, and probably Canadian also. I can't speak for Canada. Steve Sander or Dwayne Rollins could probably give us more of an opinion on this, a better opinion. But everybody who's American who wants to invest in this sport ultimately wants to be in Major League Soccer. Full stop. I really believe that. Even our NASL owners who talk about, who are Americans, who are locals, who talk about the local control, and they spout the sorts of things we hear a lot about NASL. I think everybody wants to be in Major League Soccer. It's the established brand. Now, if you go to foreign owners, this is where Bill Peterson's very smart, and the NSL is very smart. I don't think they quite see it that way. I think they probably see MLS as a bit of a laughing stock, a bit of a league to mock, retirement home league that overpays. I just went through the top 20 highest paid players in the world, and I think 4 of them are in MLS, which is crazy when you think about the level of play in the league. Now this is this was for last year, so this is Chinese explosion, but it's just madness, really, the kind of money MLS throws at some of these players, at some of these DPs. And I just had to write an Orlando City preview for a different website, and talking about Nocerino and the amount of money they were throwing at Nocerino. No team in Italy was going to pay him that. No team in England was going to pay him that. So I think there's a certain degree of madness around it, and people abroad, in Europe in particular, see MLS as that. And perhaps Bill Peterson has put his finger on something that's very real, and these serious investors, Rayo Vallecano, for one. Others that we know about, that we've heard about, speculated about from Italy and other places in Europe, might see the NASL as a more serious league than MLS, quite frankly.
Well, just to dovetail off of that, I think maybe they don't have, maybe Major League Soccer doesn't hold the same allure as it does domestically. That may be
That's
what
fair.
it is.
Yeah,
and so you have these wealthy owners who say, do I want to attempt to bang the door down and pay $100 million to Major League Soccer, or do I want to pay $7 million to get in the quote American market, which holds more allure overseas than what we see it as. We live here. We don't really think of the burgeoning American market. Overseas, they do. Here, there's more of an allure of Major League Soccer that may not necessarily translate overseas. So I think, however imperfect this strategy may be by the league, by the NASL, I suspect that that's what's going on. And again, we're seeing it manifested, as you said, whether it's Miami FC or whether it's Bio OKC or the Cosmos for that matter. So, yeah, I mean, and I can tell you, we've had this conversation before. There was a change of ownership in the Railhawks, but it was one of 3 that were being courted. And my understanding was that 2 of those were international investors of substantial means who eventually, who ultimately, for one reason or another, were either not chosen or passed on the opportunity. And Steve Malik, who is a local investor, ended up purchasing the team.
Which is, I think, fortunate for the fans in the Raleigh-Durham area, because quite honestly, and let's go here now, Neil. I don't like. This may sound very nativist. I'm not a Donald Trump supporter. I'm actually I'm a very active liberal Democrat. For those of you who might not know that, and actually derive most of my income from political work on the left. But I'm having a problem with foreign ownership when you have foreign owners who don't have any community ties and local ties investing in a market. And when things don't go as well financially as they might think, which I think almost inevitably happens in American soccer, if you're outside of MLS, there's always going to be rough patches. And we see these wild spending in year 1 under new ownerships or new clubs, and the pullback in year 2. Maybe Rayo is going to be in the same. That's going to happen with Rayo next because they're spending like mad, and we'll get to them in a minute. But I think the premise of bringing in foreign owners as majority owners in markets they don't live in or are not familiar with is a problem, and long-term could be a big problem for NASL. It could create a splash now. And again, we've talked about the pitfalls of American owners because they might have this allure of MLS. But I think getting a guy like Stephen Malik, that's a desirable solution for a club like Carolina. Now, that having been said, he is an American owner. He is local. He's a venture capitalist. And if MLS comes calling at some point, I think we know what his decision would be. And I think that's the case with any American owner. I really believe that. So your thoughts on that?
The way I see it, and I'm curious what you think, is I see it as whether the need for domestic ownership is determined by the size of the market. I think in a place like Miami or New York or LA, you can have large foreign investor who comes in as long as they put sure-handed people on the ground who do know the local area in charge. If you've got Eric Stover in New York, or if you put Peter Wilt wherever, you can get away with that in large markets. I think the local nature of ownership becomes more important in a place like Raleigh or Indianapolis or Jacksonville, places like that where they are large metropolitan areas, but the ownership and and sort of the elite know each other. Yes. It's still small enough that they all run in the same circles. So that Steve Malik, one of the things he said that struck me when I first interviewed him last fall, I asked him kind of what he thought when he first went to a Railhawks game. And he said, I looked around the ad banners on the railings and looked at all the companies that were being advertised and realized I know all the people that own these companies.
Right.
And so that's the value of having someone local in Raleigh, North Carolina, or even San Antonio, where Gordon Hartman was. I mean, that's the advantage of having someone who has their finger on the pulse and goes to the chamber meetings and knows that. It's less
Don't those
important
teams
in
don't
major
those teams sell more
metropolitan.
sponsorships though? I mean, this is a problem for NASL. Wouldn't a guy like Stephen Malik, Gordon Hartman, Tom Fath, local owners sell probably more in sponsorships because they run in those Chamber of Commerce circles than the sports marketing company that comes in from Brazil? I mean, of course, that was traffic, but sports marketing company that comes in from Italy or someplace and invests in a team. Isn't it just logical they'd sell more sponsorship? The local owner.
100%. At least they should.
Yeah.
And that's something else. Again, using Steve Malik as the example, when I asked him for a lot of specifics on what he was going to do, the area where he was most fluent last fall, and I'm going to hopefully interview him again soon. The area where he was most fluent as to what his ambitions were was corporate sponsorship.
Right, and that's the area where when foreign owners, I can tell you this from Fort Lauderdale, when they came in and took over the team, the Brazilians that are doing quite well now, I have to say Luis Casedo, the managing partner of Fort Lauderdale now, is fantastic, but it took them a year to get to this point. That was the thing they knew the least about. They sold less corporate sponsorship, I think, than any other team in the league last season. They sold less tickets than any other team in the league last season, including league-owned Atlanta, which has since been folded. So that's the problem, I think, with foreign owners. They just don't. They have too much of a learning curve in year one. And Stephen Malik coming in right away and telling you the place where I'm most comfortable and can hit the ground running is on selling corporate sponsorships. That's a good thing.
And not just selling corporate sponsorships, but also, cajoling or strong arming people he knows to have their companies do bulk ticket buys, or to put Railhawks paraphernalia in their stores. I mean, there's the little things that have more of an impact in, metropolitan areas of 1 to 2 million than they might in a place like New York or LA. And so that's, I guess, going back to the original point, I think foreign investment is fine in a major metropolitan area as long as you have the people on the ground doing the work. But at some point in these other areas, the guys that write the checks need to be the ones doing the sale. And I think, to me, that's where I draw the line of demarcation.
Yeah, I have to say, Puerto Rico Islanders, the dearly departed Puerto Rico Islanders, who had a series of local owners. They had four, not a series. They were all partners. They had four or five different partners. The thing that impressed me the most about them for a second division team was that they had their merchandise in every shop, even tourist shops on the island, or at least in San Juan. So that had a lot to do with Stuart Clapper, who was one of their owners, who had all these relationships and was able to get the Islanders stuff at the airport in San Juan, right next to all the Visit Puerto Rico stuff, right? I mean, so that really goes a long way. Whereas we've never seen, speaking of South Florida as an example, we've never seen Miami FC / Fort Lauderdale Strikers. Now we have another Miami FC. We've never seen this merchandise in any mainstream shop in the market in 11 years that the team has existed. Never once have they been sold in mainstream shops. Even getting them to soccer stores at times is very difficult, believe it or not. You'll walk into a soccer store in South Florida and you'll see the Manchester United shirt and the Arsenal shirt, but you won't see anything Strikers. And you'll see the Orlando City shirt. That's the other thing, but you won't see the Strikers shirt because there's this reverence for MLS, rightly or wrongly, among a lot of fans in the U.S. So I get your point about the line of demarcation. What are the NASL's prospects, though, long term with these foreign owners? Will they have to get some sort of local partnership? I mean, should there be always a feeling that even if you have a foreign owner that owns 51% of the team, you get some high level local owner that's plugged in that owns 25 to 30% of the team, or whatever outstanding share there is?
Again, it depends on the market. The Railhawks have had minority owners before in the past, like back when the Wellmans owned the team and the Rochester Group owned the team. There were minority owners then. But if you're a minority owner, then guess what? You're going to be sort of seen as locally a minority owner.
Right.
You're not the one who has the final say. So I still go back to the same thing. You can try to attract minority owners, and that's fine. But if they're not the ones who can make independent decisions when they talk to these civic officials and government officials, then I don't know that it's going to have as much impact. By the way, real quick, you talked about Puerto Rico. I guess if you sort of extrapolate our argument out to Puerto Rico, it raises questions about what their process is going to be and what their prospects are going to be. They've got a very talented front office guy in Tom Payne there, but he's not of the island.
No.
But he's not of the island. And Carmelo Anthony is kind of on the island, but he's not there. So
and they were all local. The Islanders were a completely local team previously.
Total. They just had a total funding problem. That was their problem. I think they
Right.
leveraged everything they could to keep that team afloat. I would presume that this team has some money to go ahead, but other than I'm sure that they have people in the front office who have local connections. I certainly hope so, but it's sort of the top or upper echelons. I have my questions.
Yeah, and the other aspect of this also is the economy on the island is terrible right now.
Sure.
Let's not forget that. This is that's why I think a lot of people who don't know the history of the Puerto Rico Islanders soccer team and how successful they were at the D2 level and how they beat the Los Angeles Galaxy in Champions League and how they beat Toronto FC in Champions League and how they took Cruz Azul to the brink in that penalty shootout. I wonder why the NASL would expand down there. I've heard this from a lot of fans, just kind of casual fans, saying Puerto Rico it's like going into Detroit in 2008. Why would you go to Puerto Rico right now? But I think they're banking on the celebrity of Carmelo, the management genius of Tom Payne, and I guess just the residual loyalty of soccer fans from the Islanders. But it's not going to be easy. So that's a great transition.
Well,
go ahead. I want to talk about them, and I want to talk about Miami and Oklahoma City. So go ahead.
Yeah, just briefly. I mean, they're banking on the celebrity of Carmelo Anthony, and again, I'm going to go back to what I've been banging the drum about for 6 to 8 months. The San Juan metro statistical area is a 2 million population to MSA, and you can draw a line to all the potential expansion markets except for Oklahoma City, which is its own animal and its own history within this short-lived NASL. You can draw a line between the incoming expansion markets and the rumored expansion markets, and they're all 2 million or more metro statistical areas, which goes right to those proposed USF D1 guidelines and the aspirations of the league for D1 status. And see, if you look at San Juan, that is a 2 million plus MSA. So I think that's a big part of it too.
And I'll just give a shameless plug here for my article on World Soccer Talk on Wednesday, which is about the Major League Soccer and their potential to try and control the U.S. Soccer Federation. Believe it or not, I know NASL fans, a lot of NASL fans, at least the ones that are on Reddit and the ones on Twitter, seem to think that the USSF and MLS are one entity. And I would say Sunil Gulati is very, very close with Major League Soccer, and he's obviously the godfather, if you will, or that maybe that's the wrong term, but he's the father of many of the strange rules that we see in Major League Soccer. That having been said, there are a lot of independent fiefdoms within the USSF and people of very, very high stature and very well respected within the USSF who don't like Major League Soccer very much and who have pushed MLS at times and don't like that MLS. Some of the things MLS has done. There's a strong faction of youth soccer people, and I actually take MLS aside on this one, Neil. There are a strong faction of youth soccer folks in the USSF who don't like that MLS has set up all these academies and that they're pushing out some of these youth soccer entities, these entrenched youth soccer entities in major markets like Dallas and New York and Seattle, the places where we've seen so many good young players come from in recent years. But I think the MLS academies are, I mean, if we're serious about the sport, MLS teams need to have good academies, and New York Red Bulls just sold a guy who came out of their academy to Chelsea. I think they're doing pretty well. I trust them more than the youth club in New Jersey that's complaining about them. But my point is that there are certain factions within the USSF that don't like MLS, and I get the sense MLS, knowing that Sunil Gulati is going to be leaving in 2018, will try and find a way to control the USSF directly, and that's when these D1 standards might get adopted. These of this 2 million MSA, which gets us back to NASL going after certain markets. So let's talk about Miami now. They're doubling down. The Miami Fort Lauderdale MSA, I believe, has 5.5 million people. Doesn't say you can only have one team in that market, so they've gone for two. That same MSA. That's
right. Right, and Miami's come in like a ball of fire and is spending a bunch of money on a bunch of players. You're more connected to that area. I'm not sure how much local outreach they're doing, how many tickets they're going to sell.
I'm not sure how many they are either. There's
right, and
there's a lot of pessimism, I should say.
Well, and it's kind of hard to judge from afar, but at the same time, even from afar, sitting here in North Carolina, I had a feeling that Indy 11 was getting there, it was going to hit the ground running. I even had a feeling that Jacksonville was going to hit the ground running. You'd see these grassroots events, you'd see these ticket drives, you'd see these coordinated events. Even San Antonio in their run up, when the Scorpions first came along, they did a lot of groundwork and took the time. I just haven't seen it from Miami, and I don't think that you have either.
No, I haven't seen it. And in fact, this just speaks to the desire of a club to have. I'm in Florida, right? Desire of a club to cover you. Jacksonville is all over me. I mean, I hear from Eric, Ryan. They're the communications guys at least once a week. I just went up to cover Jacksonville the last game. I was going to go to the previous game. They make it very accessible for me. They have made it very hospitable for me. I've never once heard from a communications staffer at Miami FC, and I'm local to them. Jacksonville is 4 hours from me, but if you're being courted and you really like their product, and I really like what Jacksonville's done from a professionalism standpoint, the way that they've structured their front office, the presentation at their games, their operations. Now, obviously, on the football side, they weren't very good last year, but that can be fixed. That is getting fixed this season. But the other three things I mentioned, they were at the top of the league as far as I'm concerned. I'm going to make that 4 hour drive to cover them rather than the 30 or 45-minute drive to cover Miami FC when Fort Lauderdale's not playing at home. Honestly, I'm much more likely to go to more Jacksonville games this season.
And I may be wrong about this, but I think a lot of the communications and press contacts through Miami is still being outsourced. I think it's still being contracted out.
Well, yeah, and I get stuff from their contract because I'm on all these PR lists anyway. From their media relations firm that they've hired, I get stuff from them, but I've not heard from the club directly once. Yeah.
So, they're spending a lot of money and they're going to make a big splash, I guess. There was the rumor they were trying to lure Drogba down. I mean, Alessandro Nesta he's a very respected name. I think from a coaching point of view, they hit a home run as far as someone who's respected within the soccer community and is
But can he coach in the United States? Because I've just picked New York FC to finish 9th in 10-team division in MLS. You can't bring foreign coaches in and expect them to be successful in MLS or NASL. Honestly, it's just a different animal coaching in this country.
Maybe.
Jacksonville learned this last year.
You had some exceptions.
There are exceptions.
I think Gunter Grunsteiner's done quite well. I know you.
Yeah. I mean, there are exceptions. I mean, he was an exception, but then you've got you need a guy, I think, like Colin. I mean, Colin's a foreigner, but that's not. I don't mean foreign versus domestic. I mean someone who has been steeped in the soccer culture of this country. Yeah. So Colin coached an MLS team, won the Western Conference with Dallas. He coached a USL team in Virginia Beach. He coached Puerto Rico. He has all these contacts all over the place. Like Witt is coaching Puerto Rico again now. Witt has far more contacts to find players than Miami FC's entire front office does. Yeah. So to find players who will play in this league, I'm not talking about guys who are going to play in Serie A or the Liga MX. I'm talking about guys who will play in this league. So I think Jacksonville, Mark Frisch would tell you this privately if you talk to him. They learned a really harsh lesson. And this year they've doubled down, going the other way. Instead of hiring two foreign managers who are going to sign a bunch of foreign players who can't acclimate and don't mesh well as a unit, they've gone out and gotten Tony Meola. What a home run hire that is. And Jimmy Rooney as his assistant, who I will tell you openly was in line to possibly be the head coach in Fort Lauderdale. He's ended up as an assistant in Jacksonville instead. That tells you the quality of hires Jacksonville's made. They've gone the opposite direction because they learned in year one, as I mentioned, they got everything else right except for the soccer side. And the reason they didn't get the soccer side right was because I think they made the mistake of falling to the trap of what Dario Sala wanted them to do, which was to hire Argentine guys. I don't want to sound like I'm being nativist, but it's just the reality.
No, and it makes all the sense, and it's similar to the mistake that other teams have made in the past of banking too hard on Brazilian imports.
Yeah, right.
Fort Lauderdale Miami FC before them
Miami
did
FC
that.
before
So
that, right.
that's right. So no, I get that. You have to have a balance there. But I don't know. I'm a little more bullish on Nesta than you are. I think if Miami doesn't succeed, it's going to be for other reasons. I think as far as just the tertiary head or even the actual head, I think he'll be fine. I think he fulfills the role of being sort of the draw and the lightning bug. Now you're going to have strong assistants to make things go. That's sort of the underrated part of all of these coaching staffs. You've got to have assistants who know what they're doing. And I don't know enough of Miami's to be able to judge that yet. But I don't know. I think Nesta was a good hire and a good draw, at least out of the chute, and we'll see.
Let's move on to Oklahoma City. And Alan Marcina has put together, obviously he's got a pretty open checkbook, which he didn't have in San Antonio. So the San Antonio, you talked about the run up to San Antonio's first year, and they spent money their first year, and they had Michael Hitchcock and Playbook Management doing all these great events for them. Gordon decided to pull back year two, and I think that team was a disaster. And everyone knows my opinion. We don't need to have a discussion about it, but I think it was good for them to leave NASL. It's unfortunate the Spurs chose USL over NASL, but Marcina has basically got an open checkbook by NASL standards, and on paper, he's built a really, really good team, but these guys have never played together before, so we don't know how they'll be. But what do you think that does from a business standpoint? Because obviously OKC Energy is established in that market, but there's a very good chance Rayo has a better team just based on the amount of money they've spent.
Well, they might have a better team, but I think some of the same concerns that I have. I mean, the mistake that people make is translating the fact that they're bringing in a lot of talented name players, and they've done that with the fact that they've cleared all the problem. Their problems are behind them, and everything's clear sailing ahead. Right. I still have not seen a lot of sort of tangible supporters efforts from down there. I know they have a supporters group, but I have not seen very much out of it. Yeah. Alan Marcina's gathered a good team. I sort of question him as a coach, but nevertheless, and they're still doing a very quick run up. I mean, this team was just announced mere months ago, and they're going to be fielding a team in an area where folks on the ground still say that it's not an optimal location for the team. They're going into a large but not metropolis, where there's already a USL team that's established, who has made connections with the community.
Quite successful, I have to say. That's one of the better.
Successful, and they got the lead. They garnered that lease for Taft Stadium that the NASL was going to have, and so it all goes back to this. It's all well and good when you've got new owners coming out of the chute and they've got a full head of steam and they're cutting checks. At some point, whether it's a year later or 2 years later or 3 years later, somebody's going to look at the bottom line. And when expenses outweigh revenues, things are going to happen. You saw it happen in Fort Lauderdale last year, where everybody had grand plans, and then that was all uprooted before the end of the season. Because somebody finally saw that team's ticket revenues was at the bottom of the league. So, at the end of the day, they're going to have to put people in the seats. It's going to have to be something more than ticket giveaways.
And I have to tell you, it may, that might happen quickly. I can just say from the Fort Lauderdale standpoint, they obviously have a very prominent co-owner in Ronaldo, and we can talk about this openly because it's been talked about openly with me. It wasn't off the record that he was embarrassed by what was getting back to Brazil and the perception of Fort Lauderdale as this team that couldn't sell tickets, couldn't sell sponsorships, had subpar facilities, had an unprofessional staff. That word filters out. So if that sort of thing happens with Oklahoma City and Rayo has a certain image to maintain, or in Miami, Silva has a certain image to maintain, things could happen quickly. I saw it happen with Fort Lauderdale. Everybody was cleared out. They have completely new staff now.
I think the only reason,
and it's working better now.
The only reason I still hold out some hope for Rayo OKC is because, going back to our original discussion, they do have a significant minority owner who is from the area who's on the ground.
Yeah.
They have a general manager and a president who is of the area and has marketed various teams in other sports, minor league teams there for many years. So there is a local connection. It's not like this foreign team just came in and dumped a bunch of money and then tried to pigeonhole somebody in there to do the work. There has been an apparatus on the ground there for a long time. Now, whether they've had the sufficient run-up time of knowing they're about to enter the season to make this, work in year one is my question. And I just think that, it would have been better served for them to wait a year, but I think at the point where they were, where it had been going on so long, they had this La Liga team who was ready to cut a check. They were not going to let the opportunity pass and let it drift away by waiting a year. I just think that that's what it was.
Right, because the Oklahoma City saga has been going on since since the spring of 2013. So,
That's
right.
Right.
It was this 3-year saga with all these twists and turns and lawsuits, and really was a black eye for the league. So I guess that might have been a decision upstairs. The quicker Oklahoma City plays, the better. I don't think Commissioner Peterson wants teams to take a 4-month run-up. I really believe he probably wants teams to take a 12 to 18-month run-up. The teams that have been successful recently, Indy and Jacksonville, have had this real ramp up of time to make it work, and Oklahoma City doesn't have that. That's the reality. Let's close on talking about potential scenarios, kind of potential storylines from this season coming up. Who do you think is going to be the most impressive team in terms of maybe not more ticket sales, but better presentation, more professional look to the team? And then we'll talk a little bit about Minnesota and what their departure means for the league. Let's talk about that for the first question first.
Do you mean on the field or off the field?
Off the field. But on the field in the sense that operationally also, but not results. But what team do you think is making the greatest strides, or maybe more than one team making the greatest strides to being more professional and being doing things a little bit better than they had in the past?
You're going to want me to say Fort Lauderdale, aren't you? That's what you want me to say.
Well, I want you to say Carolina or Fort Lauderdale because they both have new owners. Maybe it's someone else.
Look, the Carolina has made strides over the offseason. I still think it's incremental steps, which is fine. They put out a post today that had a bullet point list of
That's why I'm asking you the question, because I got that press release from the club, and I thought it was really impressive. I said, I got to ask Neil about this.
Well, I mean, it's good, but there's still a lot of things that remain to be done, both big and small. So and for various reasons I won't necessarily get into. I think the jury's still out on Carolina. Not necessarily from an ownership point of view, but from a sort of market creativity point of view, if you know what I mean. So I'm still waiting to see if I do know that the marketing budget in Carolina is going to be dramatically higher than last year. I mean, exponentially higher. Now, where they spend the money and what impact it has is what I'm very interested in seeing, because the attendance in Carolina has plateaued the last 3 years. And I know that they're leveraging a lot of things to try to jack up, season ticket sales, those corporate sponsorships I'm talking about. But I still think Carolina has several major steps to go. I still think Tampa Bay made tremendous strides last year, just in their overall everything, stadium, supporters, on the field. I know that their performance on the field was not what they wanted, and I still have question marks for this year. Yeah. But people who go to Tampa Bay just tell me that is just an outstanding situation. I don't know how much they have. I don't know how much they're going to improve over last year, but I know last year that they turned a lot of heads.
This might be the bias of Orlando fans, because they just can't stand Tampa Bay. But they've a bunch of members of the Ruckus have raved to me the last couple of weeks about what an unbelievable experience Jacksonville was for them. Preseason game, which they played a couple of weeks ago, which Jacksonville won. And that they other than blackballed, they never played in a facility like that with that kind of operation in USL when Orlando was in USL, other than Charleston, which is one of the best. Charleston is still as good an experience as an MLS stadium, as far as I'm concerned. Sure. But it's a great experience. But they were so impressed by Jacksonville, and they just said, look, Tampa Bay's not at that level. Then again, it might just be their bias.
I think that's bias. I think Tampa Bay has their act together. I mean, I know their owner is, whatever adjective that you want to apply to it. But they've made some terrific strides.
Orlando fans don't have any resentment of Jacksonville. They don't have this issue with Jacksonville, which is just a little bit further from them than Tampa. But they've got this thing with the Rowdies.
But I think Tampa's made great strides in their in-game atmosphere and their involvement and a host of other things, and their attendance improvement showed it last year. Yes, I think Jacksonville is terrific. They had a wonderful first year in attendance and everything else. Something's off there. Something, the Steve Livingston ouster was strange.
Yeah, very, very strange. And I have to say, it was strange at the game.
It came not too long after they had that high-profile friendly that they didn't draw as well as they were hoping.
Yeah, it was very bizarre. Just jumping in, Neil, for a second. Sorry to cut you off. I was at the game the other day. It was the first game since Livingstone had left, and it was the elephant in the room no one wanted to talk about. But it was something that was, you know what I'm talking about, when something like that happens, and it was just this very awkward. We were dancing around it for hours, the conversation. It's just very weird, the whole thing. But continue.
No, but that's right. And so as much as as many strides as Jacksonville has made in their player personnel and their coaching staff, which you outlined earlier, something's just and a lot of these teams have sophomore slumps anyway. Even Indy 11, who was terrific in year one, had a great year too, but even their attendance declined. Jacksonville's attendance is going to recede through just natural, maturation. But there's something amiss there in the front office, and unless they get someone in there very fast, it's going to be strange. And I can't say too much, but I know people that they have reached out to come in and run the front office, and they are not insignificant people. But the fact that they would make the plays that they made and make the outreach that they did tells me that they do not have a plan, at least not right now. And so I'm wondering what's going on there.
That's very, very interesting.
And so, I know that was very vague, but I can't be any more specific than that. I guess to go back to your original question, I guess it's Fort Lauderdale. But, how many times have we talked about Fort Lauderdale being on the precipice of turning the corner and then it all implodes? I mean, and I
have to tell you, Fort Lauderdale, they're making top of the list, but it's never going to work properly until they get out of that stadium or that stadium's renovated. I've come to that conclusion. Strikers fans don't want to hear it. They talk about a historic Rockart Stadium, and of course Pele played there and George Best played there, and but it's just, it's 2016. That facility is it's as bad a facility as any professional team in any sport in this country plays in, including minor league baseball teams, single A baseball teams. Awful.
So I guess the answer to your question is, I guess it's Minnesota United is the answer to your question.
Okay, so that's a perfect segue to the final question.
But let me add this one thing. If Carolina shows demonstrable increase in their attendance, if they can crest 5,500 to 6,000 this year, let's say, which would be a huge increase from a percentage point of view, then I will say Carolina is the answer to this question. But if they maintain, 47 to 5,000 a game, then it's a zero-sum game, and something's going to have to happen.
Let's finish up on Minnesota. I know both you and I have made this argument that this is something the league should be touting and that the league should be embracing. Yeah, they have this thing with MLS, right? But this is a real success story of the North American Soccer League, keeping professional soccer in that market. It's one of the longest continuous markets in the country to have professional soccer, along with Seattle and New York. I think those are the other two that have had pro soccer as long continuously as Minnesota has, as Twin Cities have. And then attracting this owner. He had a relationship with David Downs, who was the commissioner at the time. And just the evolution, and then going from a team that had 1,500 fans and was league owned and was on a very tight budget to a team that's getting 9,000, 10,000 a game in NASL. Yet it seems like anytime you say something about Minnesota that's positive, there's pushback, and I've been guilty of it. I mean, I've overcompensated by saying all kinds of negative things about Minnesota just to placate NASL fans and to placate the NASL front office, quite frankly. And I should apologize to Minnesota fans for that, because they think all of a sudden I hate them, which isn't the case. But there's this thing about Minnesota. There's just this awkwardness where the league doesn't want to embrace it.
No, and let's be honest. I think some of the sharp uptick in attendance the last 2 years is because they're going to Major League Soccer.
Oh, of course, right. I mean, that has a lot.
Cause and effect. So yes, the attendance increased when Dr. McGuire bought the team, but I don't think you would have seen the skyrocketing attendances of this year and last year without the MLS bid. But that being said, I mean, the increase in the professionalism of that team started from day one when Dr. McGuire came in. They spent a lot of money on players. They're continuing to spend a lot of money on players. But talk about just a patina of professionalism. I mean, that team has had it in spades even before MLS came. And again, to your point, and again, we have MLS teams that appear out of whole cloth all the time. But yes, it is a success story that this was a team that was on the verge, or an organization, a club that was on the verge of total desolation. What, 3 years ago?
Yeah. They played those players played that final against Tampa Bay, thinking. I mean, it was amazing. I just want to tell the story, Neil. Sorry to interject this, but the players after that game were sobbing because they lost on penalty kicks, and they thought that they had to win to keep the franchise alive. Their players literally thought that okay, they can't fold us if we win the title again, because they'd won the title the previous years. We got the previous year. We have to win this title, and when they lost on penalty kicks because of the brilliance of Jeff Attinella, the players were sobbing, and I remember Commissioner Downs then going into the dressing room and realizing the situation, and Manny and Jorn talking to him and basically saying these players are distraught, and kind of saying, hey, something might happen. And so sure enough, within the month, Dr. McGuire bought the team. But that's how close to going out of business they were.
All right. But it's as miraculous as the turnaround has been, the Minnesota miracle, as they like to call it, it's also sort of a simple equation. Multi-millionaire, if not close to billionaire, but a multi-millionaire plus top 10 metro statistical area and media market equals,
and top five as far as Fortune 500 companies. So sponsorship can go through the roof.
That's right. So I mean everybody knew that was a market that was lying fallow, that needed a deep-pocketed owner to make things happen. So, and now those are easier said than done, but the Minnesota miracle equation is as simple as that.
I remember when we bought the team, when I was working for the league, and we decided to keep that team in business and fold St. Louis and Baltimore, putting together for Aaron Davidson, who obviously is in the news for other reasons now, putting together the list for Aaron of the number of Fortune 500 companies in the Minneapolis-St. Paul area, because the list was only exceeded by Chicago, New York, and I guess maybe Atlanta or Los Angeles, but they have that many big companies there, was the point. And the decision was largely made on that basis, is that, okay, if NASL is ever going to be a viable league and get the kind of corporate sponsorships we want, we're much better off being in Minnesota than St. Louis or Baltimore. MLS, of course, MLS has got to put themselves in big TV markets. That's what Miami and Atlanta are about. Well, Miami's about. They have to put themselves in markets where they can get really good Fortune 500 type sponsorships, which I believe Minneapolis, St. Paul, and Atlanta are about.
Yeah. And let me just add one overarching point. This has to do with Minnesota, but it has to do with something else. And we've talked about it, and everybody knows it, but I think everybody loses sight of the huge advances in D2 since you and I started covering this league, you before me. I mean, we lose sight, and everybody loves to talk about NASL in comparison to MLS. Forget that. I don't care about that.
Right. Yeah.
What I'm comparing the NASL to is D2 soccer in 2008 and 2007 and 2009 and even 2010 and 2011. The growth in the professionalism of the teams, the attendances, the media coverage, the in-game atmosphere has and the quality of players on the field and the quality of play has increased exponentially over the last 3 or 4
We don't
years.
have loud music blaring at games like your minority owners in Carolina, like the first couple of years you had the team, and they had done in Rochester for years. I mean, we don't have people don't remember what we came from. If you showed them, if you had taken them to a Railhawks game in 2008 when Steve Donner and Chris Economides were still involved with the team, they would be stunned. It would be like going to an NPSL game now. Honestly, in some ways, obviously the crowds were bigger. That facility, Wake Med, has always been a great facility, but the presentation was so poor in so many places.
That's right, and I don't even know if they were on TV, and if they were, it was sporadic. Yeah. And this year,
Minnesota was always on TV. I think was the only team. The Thunder always had a TV deal with someone, but other than that, I don't think anyone was on TV.
And look, when I was covering this league in 2010, 2011, it was pretty much you, me, and Brian Korstadt.
Yeah.
I mean, and maybe Steve Sandor from Edmonton. That was it. And now
Steve was still in Toronto that first year trying to cover us.
I remember when I first started covering the league, I'd set my Google alerts for every team in the league, and I might get a couple a day. And now they just come in constantly. And of course, a lot of that started when the Cosmos came in the league, to be fair. But it is far more spread out, and it's far more, professional than it was before. And you've got tons of people covering the league now from a comparative point of view. The league matters now, and it's part of the fabric of the markets that they're in. And there's still some interesting pieces that will have to be resolved. We're still waiting to see what the TV deal for this league is going to be this year. And the fact that we haven't heard anything yet is a conspicuous silence as far as I'm concerned. I'm wondering whether that the rumor of maybe a CBS network of some sort may have some validity to it.
Yeah, I'm thinking the same thing too. And I reported this morning, I've heard from multiple people that USL is working on a deal also. So USL was on TV for years, but they bought their way onto Fox Soccer Channel. And the reason why USL was on in those days is they had Portland, they had Seattle, they had Vancouver, they had Montreal. They don't have those teams anymore, right? They're all MLS teams. They had Orlando. They're all MLS teams now. So NASL or USL, either one getting a TV deal at this point, after MLS has cherry-picked all the good D2 markets away and D2 and D3 markets away, it seems, would really be a statement. And I hate to bring this up, but I'm going to. MLS doesn't have their own TV deal. NASL gets a TV deal, they would actually have a TV deal, and MLS doesn't. MLS's TV deal is packaged with the U.S. national team. Now, you could argue that that's an improper subsidy from the U.S. Soccer Federation to Major League Soccer, but that's probably a conversation for another day. Just finishing up, what are your expectations for this season? You do think the growth of the league in terms of operations and presentation and professionalism is going to continue?
I think so. Yeah. What the thing that I'm looking for is to see if there's another uptick in the TV coverage from the league, something beyond One World Sports. If it's a continuation of ESPN3, that's fine. If it's something bigger than that, that's major news.
I've been told by some people that USL is more accessible because they're on YouTube. So maybe NASL has to look there.
I don't buy that at all. I think the days of packaging your league through YouTube is not a step in the right direction professionally. It may work for USL. There's nothing wrong with it, but no, it
might just make it more accessible, but it's making it it's accessible, but it's not necessarily professional. Look at it that way.
I mean, it looks like this podcast right now.
Right. Yeah. You're on YouTube right now. Go ahead.
So I'm looking for that, but more importantly, I'm looking to see if attendance across the board continues to increase in the league as it has been every year over year since 2010. And obviously, I'm looking to see that if the two new expansion teams will continue these string of expansion successes that this league has had, or whether a short run-up, unlike the long run-up that those previous expansion teams had, it's going to turn out to be the mistake that some of us fear. So those are the three things that I'm primarily looking for.
Neil Morris, where can our viewers and listeners find your work?
You can find me at WRALSportsFan.com. Twitter is by Neil Morris. and you may find me somewhere else starting in the near future, and you'll hear more about that next week.
Oh, that's exciting. That's exciting, and that's a great teaser. So pay attention to Neil next week, and he's going to have a big announcement. For Neil Morris, I'm Kartik Krishnaiyer. Thank you for joining us tonight, and enjoy your football.